you need to think about your context. And my recommendation is your context should be driven by the top.
All right, welcome back to Applied FinOps. This is our second episode, and
Yes.
luckily we're in person in London today.
Oh,
I'm joined with Frank once again.
yes.
And today we're going to shift gears a little bit and start thinking about FinOps is a practice that has a lot of literature, and yet in large enterprises, we always see this, I don't want to call it failure, but
Yes.
challenges that come up.
Yes.
Now, to start off, I know you've written a lot about top-down FinOps. Frank, do you want to start with that and we'll go from there?
Okay. So I do see and think that we call them executive, but they're anyone in leadership really. Their jobs is to make decisions based on risk and reward. Okay, they need to own the decision. And very often I was saying that we were presenting things like this is done or this is my recommendation, or in everything FinOps related, they were presented as, oh, you need a sponsor. They were just the sponsor. They were not the decision maker. They were the strategy setter. I would try to bring back the fact that the executive, the leadership, they need to make decisions. And those decisions need to come from the strategy of the company. And so it unravels through lots of things around that. So you start with, I was thinking about different types of companies. We very often, again, on the literature, you look and it seems that we are all in a fast-growing startup. No, if I am like you were in a bank, well, no, it is slow, steady, and governance is probably more important than many other things. But governance and security are very important. If I'm in a small startup, yes, I want speed, I want energy. Even if I'm in retail, where margin is very thin, I want everything to save my margin, to increase my margin. And so top-down FinOps came from this, is the idea that we should go back to the strategy of the CEO, probably, or the board even, and you can have a look at that into the quarterly report for lots of companies. And then I see the FinOps practitioner really being that person that is trusted by the IT executives to understand, debate the strategy, agree on it, and then being able to implement it or have it implemented by the technical. And so it's that bridge in the middle that is capable of transforming strategy into stuff that is done. And that also protects us and give us a career path to the office of the CTO, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's this Venn diagram that I always think about of, we can get the best tools. We can have a third party that can connect everything. I have a beautiful dashboard, set up my LDAP. Everything is there, and yet once that's done, the often question is, now what?
Yes.
Right? Do we just start monitoring every day? Do we report numbers? Do we create a dashboard? And I think without realizing there's a bigger strategy at play. And oftentimes it might be that the strategy is we want to move from a data center to public cloud. It might be that we want to scale across different regions. And then obviously the KPIs that really matter at the higher levels are oftentimes not distilled down enough. And so if a FinOps practitioner is sitting there like, okay, I'm doing everything I can and I'm doing a great job, but I think the question is always, well, what is the point?
Yes.
And depending on even the complexity of the organization, sometimes that there'll be two different business units and one of them really cares about optimization and the other one is the innovation lab. And they're like, optimization's after.
Yes.
What we want to just make sure is that we have controls in place to prevent runaway cost. When I think about a large organization, having this hub and spoke model that we talk about often in FinOps, right? That you have champions in your individual units, product teams, you have this centralized team focused on some things.
Yep.
To me, I've always found that that model works at a level, but as soon as an organization gets really complex, the strategy of how to actually enact that becomes so much more important than, tool choice or even, trying to implement the FinOps Foundation best practices there.
I agree with that. And it's very interesting. Every time when you say about this, you brought lots of concepts in there, but there is one in particular, which is, there is, I think, a difference, enormous difference between the two teams you were talking about. And it's quite interesting. When you are doing experimentation, what you want to build around that experimentation is a lab, a sealed lab. You can do all the mistakes you want in that lab. You can even have crazy thing happening, asking stupid questions. No, they don't exist, but yes. And everything will be sealed in that lab. But when you move it to production, in particular with AI, all of a sudden what you need to control, in my opinion, is every single transaction. You need to create a perimeter of security around every transaction, because there was a very funny thing about the Chipotle. I don't know if you've seen that you could use their AI bots
Oh, I did
to
see
code.
that, right.
And so it was the cheapest thing you could get is,
Right.
I can give my code and it's going to work. Because they didn't put the guardrail, which is even just a session cannot last more than, 5 minutes, or the number of elements in the token. At the same time, what you just said, yes, when you scale, you cannot have emissaries all over the world. If you're a massive company, the hub and spoke will work, but either you start creating layers, and so you have some sort of an organization inside an organization, which makes it very complicated. Or what do you recommend? Because you've been there. What do you think is the evolution of the hub and spoke in massive organizations?
Well, I think it's not to get away from it, right? But I find that the centralized team has assumed the most information about FinOps. They understand about optimization, about contextualized data. They're setting up some guardrails to prevent, the FinOps moment, I call it. But then you talk to the downstream teams. So what I've seen often is that the centralized FinOps team almost becomes a consultancy.
Yes.
Where you talk to the downstream teams and they say, well, of course I want to be optimized. Of course I want to be as efficient as possible in using the right, say, nodes in EKS or GKE, on and on and on. So this trope that often comes up of engineers don't care about cloud cost. Look, I was an engineer for a decade and I don't think that's necessarily true. But if you think about an engineer who's focused on, first and foremost, writing reliable code that doesn't break, and then it has to be scalable. Yep. It has to be secure. It has to be able to handle, outages that keep happening, on and on and on. And then we tack on one more thing at the end when we say shift left, which is, and now be efficient. And oftentimes I feel like when a recommendation is given from this central team that says, for example, you should switch your node type, right? We can clearly see this is not the right one. I feel like there's a level of hesitancy because the question is, well, you don't know my full context.
Exactly.
Right? And my priority is making sure all the other things are there. And if I don't have confidence that this change might, break my app, or it might not be able to handle scale or whatever, it's always like an instinctual lower priority.
Yes.
Right? And if it requires anything more than, say, 1 second, say it's a re-architecture of a platform, at the end of the day, what we're deciding is between building our applications to support business, or do we want to now optimize today? And I feel like this tension in the middle of, should we create or should we, continuously be optimizing? That's where a lot of practice start to fall short. That, as a centralized FinOps team, when I led at a bank, I felt that almost my hands were tied behind my back sometimes.
Uh-huh.
I had the idea, I looked at the code, I'm like, this is what we should do.
Yes.
And yet there's this level of, we'll get to it in the second quarter. We'll think about it later. We already have a roadmap for what we're building. We're in the middle of a sprint. All the excuses that come up, which are, again, not necessarily invalid, but I think it really ties really nicely with your idea of top-down FinOps. That
yes.
If you have a strategy that it says engineers and our engineering department and the CIO office, our priority is building scalable, secure, and efficient use of public cloud, and we'll be judged on it. We will make sure our assessment continues to carry that forward and not necessarily feel like, be efficient, but if you're not, it's hard to tell. We can prioritize it later. All the excuses that come up afterward.
Yes. I remember we had an interview ages ago with a podcast, What's New in Cloud FinOps, and we had someone from PwC, and she was telling us, I have engineer fatigue of getting these Excel sheets telling me what I'm supposed to do. My job, she was saying, is to build code, exactly everything you said. You say, I'm not rewarded for doing efficiency. It's not even recognized. That's why when you say the top-down, it connects with top-down FinOps, this problem, because I think what you want to do is to bring the product owner into the mix. If the mandate from leadership is to be efficient or cost efficient, then what you want is to have some story points every sprint for efficiency. I want to have some time. And at that point, it is not only visible in the backlog, because it needs to be in the backlog, it's visible also that it's assigned to me, it's visible that I've done it, and so I've done something positive, I've done something concrete. Because if I'm just doing it on the side, the interesting thing about what we do is that you end up that it is very easy to track back a mistake to the single commit, and so to the individual person. But as usual, when there is a good thing happening, it's either invisible or everyone's the owner, everyone's done it. And it's really hard to go back to saying to that person who's effectively done the good change, well done you.
Yeah, it's really, I find it very difficult to track. So, on one hand, assume that you have like an optimized spend. You're spending £1 million or dollars per month. And the first task is, hey, let's optimize, let's figure out the EBS volumes that are attached on and the quick wins. And you get to a level, and then what we're describing is almost very hard to track, right? Because you have engineers who are now, assume they're thinking ahead of time. During architecture review, maybe I should use a Lambda function. I don't need a full-blown VM or EKS. Yep. That avoidance, that decision that made will have a cost avoidance with it. But how do you track that? Right? Yes. As the more you shift left, assume that there's tools that you can use when you're writing code that tell you this isn't efficient. You should switch it, right? We get closer and closer to giving engineers the similar tool set that you would assume with security, right? We don't allow engineers to write insecure code and deploy it ahead of time, right? We prevent it from happening. And security is easier in a way that because it's binary, right? We are tracking, there's standards out there. With Cloud FinOps, I feel like the hard part for engineers is always, I did a lot of pre-work ahead of time. How do I get validation that this is the right approach? And then for product side, it's hard to tell because even if you're super technical, you stand up a Hello World app in AWS or GCP, it's probably 1,000 ways of doing it today, right? Everything from serverless to full-blown VMs to scale concerns. So even if a product team or product owner gets pulled into the mix, the question is often, well, what does good look like? What's the baseline? And so if your baseline ahead of time was way over provision and you're getting wins versus a product engineer who's super technical and says, no, we started off very efficient.
Very small.
They're not going to get the value of saying, I'm lowering the bill by 10% or by unit price or whatever.
That's the classical thing is if you want to get credit for solving a problem, create the problem. So
it reminds me a bit of like, I think in high school, we used to do like the monthly weight loss challenge, right? And I always joked, I'm like, we should bulk up the month before so we're at the highest weight possible. And then, whoa, the pounds are lost immediately. And in a way, it's a perverse incentive if you are not careful that if you're indexing on, you're finding efficiency every quarter, every month, well, what does that mean? It might mean that some people want to gamify it, say, well, why would we be efficient now? Let's wait until the clock starts.
Exactly.
And then we know where the bodies are buried. Oh, this EBS volume should not be here. Why are we on standard tiering on and on and on? Yeah.
Or you just prepare, as you say. It's exactly that. Is you just prepare, you game the system. That's why gamification, I struggle with gamification, but that's me. And it's me for a fun story. I used to work ages ago at Cisco. And I remember we've gamified with an hackathon to create integration of whatever was a product with other products. And let's be clear, that was a 6 hours work, okay? So it was absolute rubbish. And the next day we had the press release, we perfectly integrate with. And we're all pale, absolutely no. So the point is that lots of things is gamification is never going to get you, it will have an objective and it's not recurring. It takes a long time to prepare, to set up, to organize, but then in the end it's a one-off. And as you correctly said, it's a game. So if I want to win, I'm going to find ways to game the system to stay in that area. And that's the bit. It's that bothers me, I say, with gamification in some sort of the same way. I think you brought it through, but the shift left bit. Because I remember, and I'm old enough to remember the beginning of Scrum Agile development. It was, you have a team and everyone is reasonably cross-functional. That's one of the requirements. But now you have and I quite often use that, is the dev, sec, fin, green, cloud ops team. And you're there, well, okay, we're back to a team with specialists. Okay, cool, because you can't know all of this together. Right. That breaks very fast. So what we are highlighting there, I think, overall, is lots of the things which are presented to us, or to everyone who reads all the documentation, as this is going to be easy, or this is going to be simple, rarely is. And I think that's the main thing that I'd like people to come out of this, is like, you need to think about your context. And my recommendation is your context should be driven by the top, because it's their job to make risk. And if your CEO has decided that we're going to go all on AI, you're going to almost bet the company on AI, it's a choice they're authorized to make. Or if they say, no, anything that costs more than 10 is not authorized, same. I think that's what I'm trying to talk about. Context is everything, and it should come from the top.
Yeah, specifically around the top, I know the FinOps Foundation this year especially is focusing on what we call shift up FinOps. Right? We talked about shift left, dead link now, right? The idea that engineers should be able to make better decisions, and not just engineers, product people, finance, procurement, that right data, right time to make a better decisions earlier. But shifting up is really interesting to me because I find that if you go high enough in a company that's large enough, FinOps seems still, I know it's not supposed to be the amalgamation of finance and operations, but the question is, hypothetically, you go to your CEO, CTO, CIO, and you say, well, what do you care about, right? What is a mandate? I imagine the first thing and everything that will be tied around, well, lower the cost, right? And if you haven't started something yet, let's make sure that, first give me an estimate, and you go to the engineer and say, well, we need an estimate to go from data center to cloud. Okay, well, estimates are really hard because we don't know.
Yes.
And there's an expectation sometimes that I found that if you're running on a data center specifically, well, we should be able to figure out what the cost will be deterministically, plus or minus some percentage points in cloud. And the first bill that comes through is always a sticker shock. And I think it's because there's so many hidden costs available. The cost of running security really well, the cost of shared services that are logging on and on and on. And so oftentimes you go to this tool like AWS Calculator, you say, well, I need 2 vCPUs and 4 gigs of memory. Oh, it's gonna be $4 a month.
Yeah.
I spent $100,000 on-prem. This is cheap.
Yes.
And I think you brought up last time we spoke as well, there's hidden costs available as well. You are not paying for, in your IT budget, the cost of cooling, or you're not paying for X, Y, and Z, or the real estate, where in cloud is a fully baked cost there.
Yes, and that was the thing. I call it not in my budget.
Not in my budget, yeah.
There are tons of things when you're on-prem that are not in your budget. And usually, for example, when you used to, and probably still today, I used to install applications. There was a budget for the application, but that was covering only servers, potentially racking and maintenance, 10% a year, and that's it. But then it was obvious that networking was taken care of. Electricity was there. The real estate of paying for the data center was there. All those little costs, which you do not see, that cloud vendors put back into your costs. So from the company perspective, you might have even say, yes, I'm in the cloud, it's cheaper at the overall level, possibly, not even sure about that one, probably not. But then at the individual application level, the costs are massive. The change of costs are massive because I used to have 3 servers and everything was running fine. And now I have baked into that loads and loads and loads of other costs. But we don't have, and I've never seen it, the work of saying, yes, we need to move the budget from real estate electricity out of real estate electricity and put it into this cloud team.
Right.
So when you move to the cloud, all those costs should flow, the money should flow. You're going to enter into also, by the way, a hell of something. You're removing money from someone. Right. Everyone's going to be up and fighting for it. But I think that is something that should be standard in the migration, is the migration of money.
Right.
And we never talk about it because it's easier to ignore. And cloud vendors have been very good at marketing to tell you, come to me, it's easy and fun. And it's not.
Shifting gears for a second. So thinking about, large enterprises and FinOps, optimization is obviously top of mind, but I think one thing that gets often overlooked is also governance, right? Yes. And specifically cost governance. And I find it's almost a dichotomy, especially when you're trying to be much more innovative, especially with AI now, that on one hand, you don't want to prevent teams from innovating. You don't want to be a bottleneck of, a poorly run centralized team might say, everything's blocked except for we whitelisted. On paper, it sounds great, right? We're going to only allow you to use X, Y, and Z. We bought a savings plan for an instance type, only use that instance. And the devil's in the details, especially with large organizations that, how do you prevent a team from having runaway costs, but at the same time, not blocking them from innovation, right? How do you have alerts that are actually not just noise? And oftentimes, in governance, I think there's prevention, there's detection, and then remediation.
Yes.
And on the prevention side, I think there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yes.
Without a lot of, without a team having to build a lot of brittle policies that exist there. On the detection side, we're slightly better, right? Yes. We have anomaly detection. We can use forecasting for the next month, but even that sometimes breaks often because, you go to production, you're in the front of TechCrunch on a weekend, traffic is massive, and yet your cost system says, well, the spike is happening, alert, alert, alert. And so what I've seen in practice often is like, well, we get this alert every day. So instead of fixing the alert, right click, archive, make a rule. I don't want to see it again.
Yeah, acknowledge. Right? I used to do that 300 every morning.
Exactly.
On-prem, acknowledge. Yeah, it's fine.
Exactly. So finding this middle ground where you say, how do we quantify an alert to be value driven? Who should it go to? It can go to the engineer, but if it's running in production, engineer gets the alert, and then what do they actually do with it, right? What I find is that the more abstract you are to get to the data to the right person, maybe it's based on unit economics, right? The alert that comes in says your unit price per million active users is spiking. And we did some research and we found that there was a PR yesterday, the refactor by the intern that was completely harmless. It's making triple the database calls now because of something. And this is how you fix it, right? Oftentimes when you get these kind of alerts, it's up to the engineer to figure out, well, is this noise or is it real signal? And if it's a real signal, do I have to do something about it? Or is this a good thing? And if it's a bad thing, well, are we going to disrupt production to fix it today?
Exactly.
Right. So there's so many people involved in fixing that versus, when we try to conflate it to an SRE function where, well, the app is up or down, performance is degraded or not, there's a security breach or not, and there's very clear outcomes and runbooks that are available there. Whereas in FinOps, I feel like on the governance side, you get an alert and you're like, okay, I guess I'll take a look. I guess I'll call my product person. I'm not going to wake him up in the middle of the night. Oh, he's on vacation today. I guess we can wait till tomorrow.
Yes.
Right? It's just so much more opaque on what to do next.
Yes. Right. But I think this is also from a culture. I do think that if you are a CFO, and I don't think you would buy cloud as it is because there is no limit. The overspend risk. I used to work for a financially driven kind of company, and the main risk was there is an overspend risk, and you will only know about it probably quite later. You cannot block it. You cannot say like in a car, you can say modern car, you can say, don't go above this speed, just stop it. You can't do that in cloud. And even if you set up a system that's going to turn things off, you still have money that's going to flow because you want to keep the data, because that's the real thing that matters. So the thing that for me is missing is really is a desire overall in the overall cloud ecosystem of allowing limits. It's almost like a budget, okay? We used to have a budget. I would get, I don't know, you have $3 million, Frank, to do that stuff. I have 3 million. I cannot spend a penny more. So it's my job to make sure that in my garden, I do whatever is needed in an efficient way. You cannot say that in cloud. You can't say, hey, you have $3 million to build that application. If you do something and you go slightly above, you might have an alert, but the alert is going to come later and you're going to end up with more. There is no limits on how much can more be. So when you say governance, I think there is a missing also aspect of capabilities to govern in a more brutal way, I would say, more prescriptive ways. Because in the end, going back to the top, let's put it this way, the job of a CEO in particular, the first job is to make sure you don't run out of money. Because running out of money is the only mistake that you can't recover from, ever. And so survival of the company is first. And what we're talking about here is there is no limit on the amount of money I can spend in the cloud.
Well, I would challenge that a little bit. I think
Go.
A lot of the tools do offer limits, but I think if you think about a cloud provider, it's really challenging because assume that you set up a limit, right, hypothetically, and you have done really good testing ahead of time. You have figured out deterministically that non-production, the cost to serve a user is X. We assume this many users. Let's put a limit, right? You got to build the app within a specific amount. The 3 million describing. There's a couple of things that are out of the control of the engineering team and the product team. One is volume, right? If business is booming and the limit that you had set is not being raised automatically as a result of that, it's very difficult to say, well, your hard cap is $3 million. I'm like, yeah, but we tripled the revenue.
Yes.
Our product took off and everyone's using it and we're driving a massive amount of users to our company or internal tooling or whatever.
Yes.
That limit is often, I think that what we're really struggling with is that in businesses and finance, you're not really updating budgets every week, every quarter, every month. It's usually a budget cycle once a year. You decide that, well, add 10%, right? Or minus 5%. Yeah. No one's radically changing their budgets.
Nope.
And so when this new data comes in that tells you, well, the budget should be 4 million now, and unit price is going down, 4 million is great for what we're getting back in return. The processes that finance teams are following, procurement following, they're like, tell us that next year, your budget's 3 million, it's already been signed off by everyone. we can't change it. And so you say, okay, well, I guess we could we'll deal with it when we get to it. It's only January, but we're predicting we're going to be at 4.5 by the end of the year already. Okay, well, we'll see what happens.
Yes.
Try to be efficient, right? So I find like engineering understands the dynamic nature of cloud. And to be fair, I think a lot of engineers still, the mindset has to shift when you're on a data center that, when I'm an engineer who has, a CapEx Kubernetes cluster on-prem, I get told, well, maximize the usage.
Mm-hmm.
We already paid for it. If you don't use it, we're still paying for it. So you might as well use what we've been allocated today, right? When you go to cloud, I think the first thing most people do are like, whoa, before it might take us 2 hours to process a transaction, now we can do it in 10 seconds, infinite scale. And oftentimes the product team seems very happy. They're like, perfect, our SLA is faster, we can be more resilient, we can have all the metrics that we always dreamed of are now possible. And I think the paradigm shift for a product especially is, but now you have to really think about the limits you cared about, right? Maybe you don't need 10 seconds, maybe you don't need 3 hours, it should be like an hour and a half for a batch process to run. And we think that is a limit where we want to make sure we're under. Because otherwise, you can use all the clusters available. You can do all the data transactions you want, but that it comes at a cost, right? And I think that is a dynamic shift that I think a lot of people who are not in technology don't get about cloud. Because, they hear, well, we signed a PPA agreement with AWS. We know we have to hit this number and this is our plan. And so they said, well, start maximizing usage, right? And I feel like that shift of FinOps being available for the product people, the executives, the CFOs, the procurement, on and on. We still haven't gotten there yet, right? Every year we go to FinOps X and we talk about it, but
yes,
any procurement person I've talked to, they're like, dude, I sign a contract once every 3 years.
Yep.
And I see a number increasing. There was no budget for the increase. Finance team has no clue what the hell is going on here. And our engineers are now running over their heads cut off. So solving that and getting people in the room before, during, and after, I think it's still one of the hardest challenges, especially in a large enterprise.
I would agree with that, but at the same time, I'll say, so you start at the beginning, we were talking about the budgets.
Yeah.
And I think there is a big difference, again, into that lab I was talking about, which is to be isolated, so test and dev.
Mm-hmm.
There should be a way to limit how much you're going to spend. Or when you reach your limit, there should be a chat. Is this project still worth pursuing or not? Yes, when you're in production and you're serving real customers with real data, absolutely you scale almost as long as revenue scales with cost, you do whatever you want. I don't care.